Now what I would like to do is introduce our new member that is going to be joining us throughout this to the discussion. Welcome to Arianna Hartstrom, the CEO of Costa. Hi, Arianna.
Hello, Lee. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. It is a really interesting time for all of us. And I welcome back Jamie Isetts and Christopher Feran. I've been calling you Christopher Feran for about 3 years now, but we'll just blame it on my Aussie accent.
It works.
So we are going to, when we look at the hundreds of questions that came through for this this session right now, there are a lot of different kinds of questions that we received, and it was really indicative of how people are experiencing this pandemic. The way we're going to run the next session is that we're going to have a discussion between the four of us that's guided by a lot of those questions. And I want to hand over to you, Jamie, because you had a really interesting question come through, right?
Yes, absolutely. So a question I really like that was submitted to us is, in this current climate, what is the new way of buying sustainable, and how is that going to change our buying structure and for others? So really, the thing about this question is, I think really none of the key principles about how we buy are going to change, but the way that we interact with them is. So going back to those sort of starting principles that we talked about in the presentation of knowing yourself, not overbuying, really it's not that the supply chain is changing, it's just that the level of risk is higher. So each of us in our different places in the chain are going to need to reassess and re-examine who we are and what our businesses are, and what our needs are, so that we can be the most responsible supply chain partner possible. So truly, I mean, at least how I'm approaching it at Merit, it's not necessarily that I'm doing things in a different way. I'm using the same techniques to ensure stability as I was before. I just have a different level of risk aversion. And so, you know, maybe I'm going to take on a little bit less experimentation. I mean, I think unfortunately, this environment is going to mean that, you know, less people are going to take risks on relationship buying or direct trade business. But ultimately, maybe many of the people who were doing that before couldn't handle or mitigate the risks that would come with it anyway. So I think this is sort of really going to separate the wheat from the chaff.
And I also want to just mention, Christopher and Arianna, this is an open discussion. So let's just chat about all of these things. Feel free to add any comments. And you know, it doesn't have to be a one person ask a question, one person answer. If you want to take that and drive anything in a different direction, let's just do it. I think the best way that we can use this time, based on the incredible information in the first half of this, is just so that we'll have a chat like it was a podcast. Okay. Yeah. So do you have anyone have anything to add to what Jamie just said?
Yeah, I do. One thing that's going to fundamentally change for me is that I'm not traveling this year. Mm-hmm. You know, travel is one of those things that it's not essential to do your job as a green buyer. But I think if you want to focus more on relationships, it becomes a very useful tool to meet with people face to face and really build rapport in that way, and share time and see the farm and processing and everything else for yourself.
That's a fair point, especially working with smaller scale producers or people in the supply chain who you know, have less access to means of communication across continents. Like, traveling in person sometimes, especially, you know, with really small scale farmers, is the best way to communicate with them.
Yeah, for sure. And like, you know, one of the things that I have tried really hard to do is to connect with everyone I buy from on WhatsApp or Instagram or whatever their preferred method of communication is, just so that we could stay in touch and can continue to have that rapport that we've developed. And so focusing on existing relationships is as much for risk aversion as it is, and risk mitigation as it is, just because it's easier for me to preserve and understand the relationships that I already have, because we've already spent that time and invested that time together, and I can't travel this year. So it might change the diversity of offerings as a result of that.
You raise something that leads me into another kind of thought direction with regards to the cost of travel when buying coffee. And there are a lot of people that are looking at transparency and how much did you buy the coffee for? And it leads me to think about hidden costs of buying coffee. So the travel costs to origin and are something that people may not think about to buy coffee. But Arianna, I want to bring you in here because I'm wondering, with what you do, which is warehousing of green coffee, is that a little understood part of the value chain, or am I missing something here?
No, I think you're right on target. Green coffee warehousing costs are typically either embedded in a contract price or a spot price that you're purchasing from your importer. Or if you're purchasing X warehouse, then you'll be receiving, for example, an invoice for the outbound handling fees associated with those services. So a lot of times those services aren't communicated during the actual contract negotiations. And so it's a great idea, and I recommend for roasters just to ask the question so that there won't be any surprises down the road.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Go ahead, Christopher.
Oh, no, it's just it's one of those things that I think a lot of people don't look at the terms of the carry on a contract. Typically, the way it works is that an importer will have an account at some warehouse, and certain aspects of like the loadout charges or the pallet charges or whatever might be passed on to the roaster. They might be built in the contract depending how it's written. And so you might think that you're contracting coffee for $3 a pound X warehouse, for example. But then you're getting charged 1.25% per month on the inventory you're carrying, or 3 cents a pound or whatever it is. And so when you're building out your Gantt chart and figuring out like, oh, I'm going to burn through this coffee in 8 months, at the end of that 8 months, I might be accumulating an extra 21 cents a pound of carry, for example. So really the blended average cost of that coffee is not $3 a pound, it's $3.12 or whatever it is. And
I want to just circle back to a couple of definitions, because Christopher, you're making some really good points. Just because I know we have a range of people who are listening into this conversation. So I just want to be clear that when we're talking about carry costs, so let's break up the cost of coffee to a roaster. So first of all, we have the actual cost of the green coffee, which for a lot of us is defined as an FOB price, meaning like everything up to when the coffee is shipped from its country of origin. Then we incur costs from export and import, costs to load the coffee from the port to us, and also costs for warehousing. And then there's carry charge. So carry charge doesn't it's different from the storage fees that you pay to the warehouse. It actually represents the risk that normally if you're a similar size to me and Christopher, this is the cost of the importer holding the coffee for you and releasing it to you over time. So you do pay for that. As opposed to taking it all at once. It represents the way that they're carrying that risk for you. And so you do end up paying for it. So what I like to do when I think about my target costs for my different specs is I'm thinking about I think about it in terms of what is it going to cost to me when I have it on hand in my warehouse. So that means, all of those things, shipping from the warehouse. I understand, how different people that I work with are going to apply carry differently. And then I kind of normalize it all into a cost that makes sense for me and is my number. So sorry, just wanted to pause there and make a note.
Yeah, you can actually exercise. It depends on your volume, of course, and the importer you're working with, but you can get what's called a blended contract, where they spec out what they assume the length of your position is going to be in terms of time, so that they understand the financing that they're going to pay, and they can just give you a flat price of a coffee with the carry built in. And that could be helpful, especially if you are a newer green buyer, or if you just don't want to have to deal with more complicated spreadsheet than is necessary.
You know, as somebody who doesn't buy green coffee and whose brain filled up very quickly from all of the stuff you guys were teaching us this morning, it begs the question, is this a good time if you want to learn how to buy green coffee? Is this a good time to start taking on board those challenges? Or is this a more challenging time to start learning about this?
I mean, if you're already in the role as a green buyer, then you should.
No, so you're a roaster,
yeah.
and you've decided, well, you know what? I am in trouble. I have to find a new way to save some money. And I keep hearing people talk about direct relationships. And I know I don't have anywhere to store my coffee, but I'm learning from this Map It Forward workshop that I can store it at a warehouse. Costa has warehousing. So I want to explore this as an option moving forward. Is this a dangerous time to do that, or is this a good time to start thinking about doing that?
It's a harder time to do it, for sure, just because there's less appetite for risk across the chain. There's less available trade financing from importers and exporters, who are the partners that we rely on. Like, Jamie and I are not paying the customs agents, paying for the logistics cost to move a container on a ship. We pay import partners to do that. And so they're taking on the cost of that, and we pay them for that service. So it's not like we are necessarily seeking out the warehouse ourselves, or seeking out any of this. We lean heavily on other folks in the chain. So understanding where your money is going is always advisable for a business. But on the flip side, controversial opinion, I think there are too many green buyers. I don't think that most companies actually need their own green buyer. So there might be some efficiencies to be had sharing a green buyer between several small companies. But I don't know if Jamie has any other thoughts on that. But
and Arianna, I think all of us want to have say.
Yeah, I can't stand it on that
one. Christopher, will you try something for me?
Sure.
Will you take your slide off, and will you put Skype up? So we're just going to try. I can see three of you. I wonder if you can
arrange this somehow.
Yeah, just so that people might be able to potentially see if you can stretch it out or make it full screen or something like that. I don't know. So that we can see the video of Skype.
Lee wants the reaction shots.
Oh,
yeah,
fuck,
well, I'm having a hard time having this conversation and to avoid,
So this is at least that way people who are watching actually get to see our faces, and you don't need to put the screen at the back.
Okay. You just want the Skype screen?
Yeah.
All right, let's try this. Does
that
work?
Yeah, that's much better.
Cool.
I think, except we can't see you. That's the only shitty part about it.
That's totally fine.
I just think people would appreciate if we could, if they could see faces and stuff like that. So going back to what we were talking about, I really appreciate that, Christopher. Thank you for that. And if you guys in the live chat can just tell us if you prefer this or not. We do see a little tiny bit of you in the corner there, Christopher. So just wave hard. So Jamie and Arianna, what do you have to say about Christopher's, we have too many green buyers?
Well, I think that's one way to put it. I think
You're being all PC.
I think another way to put it is that just like with anything, and yes, this is very, very PC, but yeah, with anything that's where you have to learn based on experience, like it takes time to build your craft. So if you're getting into it right now, like, there is a lot to learn and there's no textbook you can pick up to learn it. And even if there was, it's so dynamic that it changes all the time. So, unless you're super willing to take on a ton of risk, like, because, you're going to be making the same mistakes that all of us have made, but in a more difficult environment. And also most beginning green buyers, that's not the only role. They might be doing literally everything in their company if they're a small micro roaster or run a cafe. So that's a lot of things to balance. My recommendation would be to, and really in any sales environment, to start slowly with buying spot coffee from people who are willing to communicate well with you and are willing to give you information. If you build them, start with as few coffees as possible and try to, like, honestly, the in the spreadsheet that accompanies this workshop, like, is probably a good starting strategy for any new micro roaster. And yeah, just like, don't bite off more than you can chew. And if you're doing that, like, if you're biting off more than you can chew, then yeah, maybe you're going to find yourself in a position where you're saying, like, I don't really need to be a green buyer.
Arianna, what do you have to add to that?
Well, I would just say, don't hesitate to be your house, even though, there's a little bit of we're slightly removed from the conversation on the onset. But if you do have a green coffee warehouse in your region, reach out to them. So many times they can guide you. And if you're interested and you have the liquidity to invest in your own stash, your own inventory, however, you don't have the space at your roastery to hold it, start the conversation with a green coffee warehouse. In our case, we work with smaller roasters and have different programs set up for those situations that are smaller quantities, heavy micro lot, concentrated inventories.
So help me understand it from this perspective. So I'm a roaster. I have been, someone else has been buying my coffee for me. I go and I get it from an importer. And I've decided that I want to try and explore some new ideas in the way that I'm going to source green coffee. If I come to you, Arianna, and I say, hey, listen, or can I do this? Can I come to you and say, so listen, I want to shift some of my buying practices. I don't quite know how to do that. Can you give me some advice? Is that something that somebody could do and come to you about? Like, am I able to use your access into the supply chain to start considering some new things that I can do?
Well, first off, because we work with all of the importers and so many producers and brokers, we're the neutral party here. So
there's me causing more controversy.
But that being said, we welcome any sort of communications and inquiries that we can then say, well, based on what you're looking for, these might be some of the importers you'd want to contact. Of course, you can go to each individual importer's page and see where their spot coffees are being stored. But sometimes you just want to go to one source and get the whole book of what's being offered.
Right.
We can't disclose all of that to you, but we can sort of make recommendations, just try to facilitate bringing partners together. If you're looking to move towards importing direct, that's probably a more complicated conversation. We can certainly give you information about, the custom side and sort of what to anticipate in terms of some of the hidden costs, and depending on what origin you're looking to work with. But I think we would always recommend you partner up with someone who's currently storing product at one of our facilities, so that we can help you that way.
Especially at a time like this, right? Especially
Correct.
when the supply chain has been disrupted as much as it has been, and that there's so much risk aversion that's going on. Trying to throw yourself out there may be challenging.
Well, and this is such a relationship business that if you can work with the relationships that are established and solid, and work with those folks that you can, build confidence with, and that's really going to be your best route, I think, during this time of crisis.
Christopher?
I just want to come back to
Jamie.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Sorry. I just want to come back to a point of clarification. So a lot of people use the terms direct trade and relationship coffee interchangeably. So I just want to clarify how Christopher and I approach it, because our approach is very based on getting the best possible service and managing the risk. So when I think of direct trade, that means literally you or the person who is growing the coffee and selling it is you meet every step along the supply chain. You two are the only two parties who are involved. And if you are brand new to that, it might seem pretty straightforward. Like, okay, we just arrange shipping like it's a toaster or something. And it doesn't work like that. So it's really important to understand all of the things that need to happen in the green coffee supply chain to get it from point A to point B. So of course, somebody's got to grow the coffee. Somebody's got to, even once you have cherries that have been picked off the tree, they need to be processed to a state of where they're dry enough to transport and hull. They need to be hulled. They need to be cleaned. They need to be moved in country to the port, shipped across the world to you, go through customs, because since it's a food product, like you can't just ship it like you can
toasters,
like a book or something. Yeah. Like you have to have different countries do it differently, but you have to have specific paperwork that goes with it. And so it's worth it to have somebody who's knowledgeable in that and does customs brokerage on your side. Then you have to store it, you have to finance it, you have to take it. So there's a lot of pieces along there, and you can absolutely do all of them yourself. However, you will, you won't be able to do it as well unless you have prior experience and you are taking on a great amount of risk. So, the way that I approach this, I think of what I do as more like relationship buying. So I have a relationship with each piece in that supply chain. I build social capital with each of those people, and that gives me the ability to, if I have a producer that I want to work with who doesn't have all of those pieces, as part of their chain, they can't, do all of those things. I have these relationships to rely on to plug and play into different things. And I know Christopher works in this way as well. It's extremely important. Yeah, I would say to, and also the thing is, like, they can do those things better than I ever could, so, and also in some more difficult origins, I will pay people who, their express job is to, organize and be an on the ground voice with the farmers, or to supervise the milling, to make sure that the quality is on point throughout that process, because I need someone to be physically there, and I can't be physically there all the time, especially because I buy across different origins. So, if that sounds like a lot, like it kind of is, you can absolutely do it yourself, but
I'm exhausted just hearing you say all of that.
I mean, that's why
that
we have
definition
a job.
is so great. The distinction is just so well put there, Jamie. Well done.
Well, thank you. But yeah, so if you are looking to, buy direct, that's wonderful. Understand that you're taking on more risk and that you're going to have a lot to learn.
A lot of newer buyers, I think it would be cheaper because they look at the markup that
Right.
importers add on their spot coffees because importers have that risk. They have the financing charges and everything associated with it. And the truth is that my costs have not gone down as I've moved more and more into relationship buying or any sort of more directness.
I bet you your spare time has gone down though.
I've become a little bit more specialized, that's for sure. What it does though is it does give you an opportunity to develop a sort of coffee program that is wholly integrated into your business, and develop those relationships in that way. But one thing that Jamie brought up that I think is not fully understood or appreciated is, like, let's just take one piece, the dry mill. So
Right.
when we're buying coffee as a pre-ship sample, usually that has not passed through the dry mill. That is a sample that was hand milled, maybe by the producer and sorted for defects there, and then sent to us, maybe by an exporter. But when it gets to that full-scale mill, it might not match for various reasons. It could be that the equipment sorts density differently. It could be that it has very high outturns, which can affect your yields and therefore your overall cost, and your need to buy additional coffee. It could be that when you received the PSS, it was only representative of 17 farmers of the 400 in that group. There could have been any number of reasons. And so understanding who your dry milling partner is, which is usually something that's done on an export side, is really helpful to ensure that when you are purchasing a coffee, you are actually going to get the resulting coffee that you intended along the way. And of course, there are different costs for different mills, and it compounds very quickly.
Go ahead, Arianna.
I was going to say another option for an incoming roaster to consider, if an established roaster hasn't mitigated and managed risk as well as Jamie and Christopher have, and used those tools, then there's a good chance that there's some, additional contracts, additional beans that that more established roasters would consider to redistribute. And so that might be an option for a roaster that wants to get started, where the product's already here. There are going to be no surprises and additional costs to have to, learn through and stumble over.
Over the next couple of days, we're going to be talking about roasting, and we're going to be talking about leadership. And I want us to look at leadership in green sourcing for a second, because you guys, the way that I view what you do is that you are custodians and curators of the green coffee. And that once it gets handed to a roaster, they are the custodian and curator of the kinds of flavors that they're going to produce from that moment on, right? Excuse me. As custodians and curators, there's a heavy kind of focus on leadership in the level of integrity that you bring to what you do. Now, terms like transparency and traceability are bantered around a lot. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of terms in our industry that we don't have universal definitions for. And those are the kind of things that I'm transparency and traceability are ambiguous terms in that way. When we look at the idea of leadership and the uncertainty of what's happened, how do each of you approach the uncertainty in your custodianship and the responsibility that you have to the companies that you work for, and not sacrifice the integrity of the commitment that you've made to the partners and the relationships that you've got? Crickets. Was that a confusing question, or was it just too much? Or
it's just complicated. I mean, I don't think it's really any different now than it is at any other time in the business cycle. Like your relationships are your relationships, your contracts are your contracts, and business will go up and down. It just happened to change a lot very quickly for mostly everybody.
But so there's a distinction, right? There's a distinction of people who shit the bed when all of this happened and just started to scavenge for, oh, fuck, what do we do now? And this is where leadership comes in, right? This is like one of Merit Coffee that Jamie works for. I'm a customer of theirs and they're a customer of mine, not through Map It Forward, through Elixir Specialty Coffee. Knowing the way that Jamie does her job, I had no question that we were still going to be supplied with coffee, first of all. Second of all, I was confident that Jamie, and I'm sorry to talk about you in the third person, Jamie.
That's okay.
While you're
Give
here.
me lots of compliments.
I knew that Jamie wasn't going to compromise the quality of the way that she did business in this situation. As on the other side of my business operations in Map It Forward, I watched very keenly the way that different people shifted and struggled and did shit the bed in a lot of this. And it was fascinating to watch the way that people responded as green buyers and as roasters in this situation. Don't even get me started on the cafe owner side of things. That's for the next 3 days from now, but we'll just stay focused on the green buyer side of things. People, going back to that dragon analogy that I was talking about in the beginning, people either kind of looked up at the dragon and are still looking up at the dragon, or people just said, you know what, I know my eyes are seeing that there's a dragon there, but I can't deal with this right now. I'm just going to walk away and shut everything down. And the defining, I guess, perspective for me in my kind of exploring how different people, like what's that thing that is allowing people like Jamie to continue and just like shift a little bit but stay on course for what she's doing, versus other people that freaked out and just don't want to accept what's going on. And I think the difference is a couple of things. One, it's that you're not pretending to know what you do. You actually have the experience to do your job, Jamie. And the other thing is leadership. The other thing is the confidence in that. Am I missing something there? Because we've seen a lot of people react very differently to this situation. And we could see just from the questions that were coming in that the industry is in quite the freak out mode.
Well, thank you, Lee, for your, complimentary description of me.
It's just I'm not nice, I promise you. I'm just honest.
Just how it is, Jamie.
All right, I'll take it. I'll take it. So, I mean, for me, really, I'm always, I could never have predicted something like COVID, but this is always the way that I'm building my program. And something that you'll notice if you revisit the starting principles that Christopher and I came together on in our presentation is that, in a landscape of uncertainty, which is out of your control, those 4 things are the things that are in your control. So when you come back to them, it doesn't matter where you're at. You can touch on those things at any time. You just like, in life or in business in general, anything, like you have to constantly be checking in to know who you are and understand what your mission is. You want to have a game plan, but you have to be flexible because you want to bend, not break when things like this happen. Like at the end of the day, social capital is the most important thing because, call me a bad capitalist, but it's just, that's what you're going to have when everything falls apart is your trust and your relationships that you've built. And yeah, like, just the simple principle of not overcommitting. It allows you to, my old boss used to say, don't ever overpromise and underdeliver. Always do the opposite. And I really believe that's true. I really, try to take a measured approach with this kind of stuff. That's why I come across as so PC in some of these questions. I'm not always like that. But yeah, I mean, like, also just all of those things sort of come into trying to be a good listener. It's sort of a pivot from this question, but one of the most valuable things that I get from traveling to Origin, for example, is just having the ability to sit back and listen and take in information that I didn't even know I needed to take in. So I think that's really true with everything. And of course, like I'm surrounded by a great team here at Merit too. And the fact that, all of them approached it with these same values was like super helpful in keeping me stable and keeping me from feeling like the sky was falling, you know? And at the end of the day, like, whether you freak out or don't freak out, there's a lot on the line always. So the less that you kid yourself about that in times when there's not a crisis, the more that you are versatile and flexible when things like this come along.
Right. I want to ask you guys now about hard conversations. I imagine that has been in the scope for all three of you. Who are the people you're having hard conversations with right now, or over the past 8 weeks? I can't believe that this has only been going on 8 weeks, right? But how has that transitioned? You guys being kind of the center point between the back end of the supply chain or the start of the supply chain and the end of the supply chain. The green buyer is typically the person who's kind of the connecting link in all of that, in the warehouse as well. What are some of the hard conversations you've had as experienced professionals with both extremes of the value chain? Anyone?
I think in our case, the conversations have mostly been just assuring importers and producers that we can continue to receive containers. We haven't had to turn away any containers. We've never turned away a container in 18 years of doing business, regardless of our size or capacity. We have the flexibility to kind of expand and contract as the market requires. And probably the most difficult conversations have been, in our case, have been more internal, just with our staff and making sure that they all feel comfortable and safe, and because there's an aspect of gratitude. I'm glad I have a job. I'm glad I'm considered essential. But then what is that essential worker's family? How do they feel about that?
Yeah, wow.
Who's home and being exposed to something that they're not comfortable or familiar with. So I think those conversations have probably been a little bit more challenging. But from the outward perspective, it's just been about assuring that we can handle the capacity.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How about you, Jamie? Have you, with regards to the way that you have you had challenging discons with producers, importing?
Absolutely.
I didn't figure I'd need to prompt you very much on that one.
I mean, but luckily, we're so lucky. I hate having to do this, but there was the most difficult conversation I've had is I had one contract that I had to cancel. It's a beautiful, truly exceptional geisha lot that we bring in every year. We're so privileged to work with this producer, and but we don't we pay for it directly to them. We pay in cash when the coffee is moved. So I couldn't justify using cash for that immediately for a coffee that we're going to be using so much later in the year. And, we went back and forth and tried to problem solve together. And ultimately, I had to say, like, I can't, if unfortunately, just based on where I'm at, I can't abide by those terms. You should take my deposit, and, if you can find another market for the coffee, take it. And if not, I can take it on these terms later in the year, but I can't do this right now. And, of course they understand the position I'm in too. Luckily, it's not a huge quantity of coffee, and it's something that's kind of an outlier in my book. But, I think what really helped with that is because we had, I tried to keep my communication with them back and forth as solution oriented as possible. And like, this is where I'm at. I can't do this, but what if this, and really, not just bringing a problem to the table, but trying to bring a solution so that we could just keep the conversation as concise as possible and letting them know as soon as I knew where I was at so that they have as much time as possible to shift. You know, I I hate doing that. Luckily, we were only forced to do that with one, but you know, yeah, it was a difficult conversation to have. Also, less problematic, yeah, with some of the coffees that it's only my second harvest or something working with this particular supply chain. I've had some snafus with like, oh, this importer doesn't want to do, move coffee that's this expensive without a deposit, or just kind of like the terms of financing and movement of coffee are changing as people are more risk averse. But again, it's really about problem solving, and like the worst thing that you could do is commit to something rashly and then come back later and say, oh no, like I can't do that. So I try to minimize that situation as much as possible. But in a climate like this, that's going to happen. So really, like, see where you're at, then take a pause, see where you're at again, and offer a solution based on where you are right now that you can commit to and that you can feel comfortable in, so that at least you have less kind of wishy-washiness, as little as you can get. People really need that right now.
Also very interesting. There's two different correlations between both of your answers, and I want to kind of draw them in a second after we hear what Christopher's difficult conversations were. Christopher, have you had any difficult conversations? And if so, who have they been with, and kind of what's the flavor of them?
I mean, similar to what Arianna said, the most difficult conversations have been internal.
Yeah.
Phoenix is really small. There are only two administrators, me and my business partner. So dealing with the uncertainty surrounding employees' jobs at retail and everything was really quite challenging and painful, and lots of sleepless nights there. But on the other side of things, for about 2 weeks, I was having conversations every single day with producers, with exporters and importers. And I think the most challenging conversations were with importers, because I was like, hey, I'm not going to be able to make my 30-day terms this month. I'm going to give you a partial payment. Can you float me at no additional interest for another 30 days? Let's bump it to net 60. And again, it's relying on the social capital that I've built up, working for years with them, so that they would trust me that I would make them whole in due time if they could just float me for a little bit longer until things stabilized and we could develop a new model.
Yeah, wow. We had, I'm not going to even attempt to say his last name because I fuck it up every single time, but recently we had a conversation with Gilberto on the podcast, a coffee producer, and he was telling me that the most challenging thing that's happened to him during this was also around money. So it seems that from the three of you, you're saying that the difficult conversations have been around health and money. And for him, 135 years of his family owning the estates that they have, this was the first time he was going to have to call the bank and say, we won't be able to make our payment. And I feel like this pandemic has been bringing front and center two of the most difficult subjects that we ever have to talk about, either as business owners or people who are responsible actors in a supply chain. And that's money, like not being able to show up with money, and people's personal health. And it brings it front and center, doesn't it? Like we can't hide behind this veil of a lot of uncomfortableness anymore. We have to have these conversations.
And well, I think you should be doing that all of the time. Like,
well, you know me, Jamie, I'm someone who hides away from having uncomfortable conversations. And so I don't know what you're talking about.
Look, the less time that you waste on, uncomfortable conversations about things that aren't important, the more time that you have to spend. Like, I guess, I don't know. I think it's important to respect that, you can have a personal relationship with all of the people in your supply chain as well, but you should have a respectful business relationship. It's essential that you need to be able to talk about things like price and contract terms. It's part of that, trust and verify, holding people accountable thing. Honestly, the more you talk about it, the less it becomes a black box and the more comfortable you are with it. And that doesn't mean that, you're approaching it in an antagonistic way. Often I find that, like, when I can talk about it more, it usually ends up being more good than bad. And it just builds trust because people know that if there's an issue, I'm going to communicate with them. And also they feel less scared if there's an issue on their side. They know that if they bring it to me, I'm not just going to say, well, screw you, I'm never working with you again. It's going to be like, okay, well, like, what can we do here? How can we problem solve? And like I do every year, I look at my book and I think, like, what are the things that worked out this year and what didn't work out and how could we improve? Like, typically for me, I have sort of like a 3 harvest cycle of, like, working with people until I feel like, okay, like, this relationship isn't working out anymore, because that's enough time to kind of allow for people to have the flexibility of a bad harvest, allow for people to make changes to their to what they're doing, or for me to make changes to what I'm doing. And if after that time, like, sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, if after that time we can't come together on something and create a solution, then it's okay to say, like, hey, I don't think this is working out. It's not personal, but I think, like, I learned very early on in my career to have those uncomfortable conversations. I had a few that were just, terrible, like, truly terrible.
It takes practice, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
takes courage, practice, and that you build those muscles.
Yeah, absolutely. And luckily I don't have to now, like, things that would cause me, endless anxiety and sleepless nights, because I've proceeded in a way that where, like, everybody knows, I feel like more or less most of the people that I work with consistently know what to expect from me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's less daunting.
Well, and more empowering, right?
Yeah, I mean, the less you're worrying about that kind of thing, and the more you can just, like, resolve a dispute quickly, the more, like, you can look to the future and
and get on with shit.
You can make decisions easier and better.
And you, as a CEO, Arianna, having had run a business for 18 years so far, how much does it make the difficult conversations easier for you as an employer when you know that the people that are influencing your part of the supply chain are being straight with you?
Well,
do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, when they can come to me and we can, that creates an immediate action to start resolving things, as Jamie described, then it just releases all of the worry and the fear, because usually that's all coming from a place of fear and needs to be resolved and heard. And, really just instill confidence that you're working on the same team and working for the same goals as you always have been, and really looking out for each other.
I got a question on Instagram from a producer that I don't have a relationship with. I've never heard from them before, but they have been watching the podcast and they said to me, I have worked with a new customer once and I don't know if they're going to pay me this time. And this is kind of what I'm getting around. Like, the conversation went longer than that, but that's the crux of the conversation, is that they're being told that the person is going to pay them, but due to the rockiness of the first time that they'd worked together, they can't really decide whether they're getting played or whether they can trust that they're going to get paid. And I'm big on straight talk, as you guys know. You've all done business with me. And I work with you because you're the same. And I imagine that the anxiety of of coffee producers right now is seriously high, because a couple of them have come on the podcast and said, look, we've shipped containers we haven't received payment for, and we're not confident that we're going to get payment.
Well, and that's also a good reason to work with a green coffee warehouse if you want to add on that extra security that there'll be an intermediary that would delay or restrict the release of product to a roaster.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
To payment.
I'm not sure that that people know the extent of what you do, Arianna. I think people that are getting into this, that like people like Jamie and Christopher who have a ton of experience of doing what they're doing, but as Christopher was saying, there's too many green buyers. Just like I'm going to add to that controversy, Christopher, there's too many cafe owners, there's too many roasters, but there's not enough people that are doing that well. I would say that if everybody that was doing what they're doing, all the cafe owners and green buyers and roasters and et cetera, were all very good at what they do, we wouldn't be in the predicament as an industry that we're in, and we wouldn't be as easily broken as we are, or as we have been by COVID-19. And that might be, go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, no, sorry. I just want to get a little clarification. So Arianna, are you saying that you finance some of your customers?
No, we don't finance any customers. Well, if you call payment terms, extending payment terms, I guess we are financing some folks out there. But anyway, aren't we all? But in terms of green importers, if they have stock, whether it's being delivered straight to the roaster or if they're moving it through the warehouse, if it's coming through the warehouse, it at least gives the producer, the importer, an opportunity to have that kind of final check. And we can collect if a customer is will calling, so we can collect a check for that importer. If they're in Honduras and they have an account here and that can be processed easily and we work it out, I'm not opposed to doing that. We don't have many requests for it, but if it comes down to a situation like this where it's really the only safety net that producer has to getting paid, especially if they've had a history of rocky payment with that particular roaster. We can't hold coffee on our own, because we got a tip and hey, this guy doesn't pay. So you better hold that coffee, and then he'll go buy from another importer. And, I can't go and tip off the other importer. We don't get involved in that game, but we do try to, as much as possible, just make sure everyone's being honest with one another and staying accountable, because it's going to come out. It's going to get around, and it's not a good place to be. So, which is another reason why it's so important just to face that head on. Don't drop communications. Don't hide. When it gets scary and circumstances, at least globally, we're all experiencing this together. So there's a lot of compassion out there. And I would just recommend, don't drop off the map. Don't hide.
Have the hard conversations. Yeah.
Have the hard conversations. It's so worth it.
One thing that's important to recognize here in that situation, though, is that there's a power differential. So anytime you have someone who wields less power in any sort of situation, whether it's a barista talking to a cafe owner or a coffee producer talking to a green buyer or importer or whatever, it kind of changes the nature of what a direct conversation looks like, because the tolerance has changed.
Absolutely.
And I've had, when I was a younger buyer, less experienced, there were a lot of times that I was trying to do the right thing, and I would be talking to a producer, and I didn't realize that they didn't know if they were making money. I thought I was offering a fair price, but neither of us really had the context to understand what that looked like. So even though I thought we were communicating openly and directly, there's some nuance there. And so it can be very difficult or uncomfortable, especially in this situation, for a producer to say, hey, you didn't pay me last time. I feel uncomfortable selling to you, because that places them in peril.
Which is why they come to somebody like me, because I clearly have direct conversations with people, and they're expecting that, could you maybe go and talk to this person? Well, I won't do that, but what I will do is help coach someone how to have a conversation like that. And for anybody, go ahead, Christopher.
I want to say something to coffee buyers who might be listening. Like if you're going to engage in any sort of contracting, have your financing lined up from the get-go, or at least understand what the risks are, so that like if you do pay a producer directly, you know what you can do, what other moves you can make to help support them and give them some sort of security or out, so that they can move that asset that has value.
Right.
And don't just leave them high and dry. That's your responsibility.
And what this moment really shows us is where there are gaps in the knowledge base for each of us. I won't talk about it as the whole. Let's look at personal responsibility, and we will be addressing this hardcore on day 3 in the leadership workshop. Anyone who's turning up and thinks that they're going to get a virtual hug during that presentation probably shouldn't come. But if you're going to turn up expecting to get some information on how you can really take this moment and skyrocket your growth and the opportunity that you have, this will be brilliant for you. Because this situation has exposed for each of us where our knowledge gaps are, both our emotional intelligence and our intellectual intelligence. And some people have run from this and gone, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see that I feel anxious. I don't want to see that I don't understand how to do X, Y, and Z. Whereas other people are moving towards that fear and saying, all right, so I don't know how to have conversations with people about the fact that I can't pay right now. There has never been a better time for you to approach the uncertainty of how to have those conversations, because everyone, like Arianna was saying, everyone's got compassion for you right now. Everyone's in the same boat. This is the time to practice building those muscles, right? So if you can't pay for something, having a discussion with them and saying, this is the situation, can we come up with a plan? Nothing is binary. There is so much gray area in all of this. There are so many potential solutions that new ways of doing business are absolutely going to come out of this situation. And it's about stepping into the uncertainty of it so that you give the uncertainty the opportunity to birth new ideas and new ways and new strategies and relationships and all of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the other part of it too is that like you're gonna have to deal with it eventually, so you might as well deal with it now before it gets worse. Also, on the other side, really, like, of course, looking where you need to make sacrifices, but also assessing yourself and seeing, where am I flexible and how can I be there for the people that I work with, and kind of like knowing where you stand on that in the get-go. You're going to have people coming to you asking for that same type of flexibility, and knowing where and when you can give it is really powerful because it builds trust.
Yeah. When it comes to origin countries, which are the ones that are going to be, this is a huge, broad question, and you can take it in whatever direction you want. But what origins are going to be most affected by this pandemic over the next 12 months?
I mean, I think that is really tough to say, just because every supply chain is so different. Mm-hmm. They're all going to be impacted, but in different ways.
It was a question that kept coming in. Go ahead. No, sorry. Please, Arianna, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I'm quite concerned about Peru because it was one of the few countries that I learned about that where coffee wasn't deemed essential for quite some time.
Okay.
And the labor shortage there is leaving, from what I've heard, 75% of the crop unharvested.
Wow.
So I would say, Peru is a huge supplier, and that's quite concerning. That information came from the Inter-American Coffee COVID ticker. I don't know if you all subscribe to that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Might as well give the source, so thanks.
Yeah. So Peru is one of them. We've been, what we keep hearing about is that the shift in how different origin countries are going to experience 4 different things. So how they're going to experience logistical problems, their engagement with the US dollar, how that's going to affect things, how the health ramifications are going to affect them, and what the sea market is going to do. Do you guys agree with those things? Do you disagree that they're the 4 things that are going to shift a lot of it? Are there other considerations that you think are going to determine how different origins are going to be affected?
No, I'd say that those are the major 4 considerations, but I think you could even simplify it down to the idea that where a country's stability was before this crisis is going to be exacerbated in an exponential way by this problem. So yeah, like countries that generally have a more stable supply chain or more stable infrastructure are going to have an easier time recovering, whereas others are going to have just domino effects on domino effects. And so like really I think that the landscape is kind of going to generally be the same. It's just that the extremity of how difficult these issues are is going to be amplified. So like for example, like Ethiopia is a notoriously difficult supply chain to work in. I don't
Is that
think it's
because of
gonna get any
political
easier.
reasons?
It's a huge mix of things. Political reasons, the market structure, the market dynamics, the key players, moving
Language.
coffee, language. I mean, on and on and on. But yeah, I don't think that COVID is going to make any of those things any easier. In fact, I don't think it's going to be like a flat kind of application, like a flat effect. Like it'll probably, if I had to venture a guess, it'll probably make it like exponentially more difficult to work in a place like that. So yeah, I mean, just to go back to COVID creating more of an environment of risk aversion, I think that people are going to be betting on generally more stable origins because of that fact.
I'm pretty worried about the fragility of Central American supply chain. I think back to the crisis in a decade ago, the Roya crisis, which really was precipitated by the global financial crisis and an inability to. I mean, it disrupted the finance system and currency exchange markets and agribusiness, so the ability to get fertilizers, inputs, fungicides, pesticides, and then we had a mutation of Roya that basically ran rampant. And so
Sounds like a bit of a virus I've heard of.
Yeah, something like that. But I do wonder if this is going to compound some of those effects in the next 3 or 4 years, in places that were just recovering from the last time.
I see where you're going with that.
Yeah, so I'm
if you have to
worried
keep
about that.
Harvest on the tree as well, like the maintenance that can't be done to the plants, now in the last several months and within the next few months is going to have ripple effects on the health of the coffee plants and the coffee supply for years.
Broca and so yeah.
Well, the coffee price crisis that was happening that started to hit its peak at the beginning of 2019 and continued the whole way through that. With the conversations that we were having on the podcast, what we were hearing again and again and again was that estates that had been in families for a couple of generations, they were still carrying a lot of the debt from the previous price crises and from financial crashes and from a whole bunch of stuff. So they just as you were saying, Christopher, just as they were starting to get their heads above some chance at having their head above water, the price crisis hits. And I've been talking a lot about or trying to explore actually the idea of when the price crisis impacts with the pandemic, is this going to be that situation that either breaks producers or they have to dig deeper into what I have seen is the only people that are actually making the money in the value chain, which is the banks. Are they going to have to dig deeper into that relationship and take loans at 30 to 50% and just burden their family estates even further? Is that the kind of reality you think we're looking at right now from a financial perspective?
I mean, I think so. I think it's evident to me that banks are the ones who are doing well. You know, a lot of roasters will look at importers and think that importers are taking the money. Importers aren't sure because they're not making much money. A lot of them are having to consolidate right now or refinance their own debt. And so it's like, all right, if you look at it, if a producer sells to an exporter that is financed by a bank, that's in the local currency, but then it gets exchanged to USD at the time it's transacted a few months later. There's a currency manipulation there, so you can hedge with that. Then the importer buys the coffee, but they're not actually paying cash for it. It's on line of credit, which is either trade financing through an exporter or it's through a bank. Then it comes to a warehouse. The warehouse releases it to a roaster who is financing it from their bank, which is connected to a whole conglomeration of global financial industries. So I think you're right on there, but it all comes down to the fact that the brittleness of our supply chain has to do with the fact that coffee as it exists today is only possible through the labors of basically unpaid laborers or laborers who are not paid sufficiently for the work they do. And so when those pickers, those migrant workers in Central America can't show up for work because of lockdowns and health concerns, the entire industry crumbles. And, you know, you look at places like Brazil that mechanized 100 years ago after slavery was banned. And I wonder if mechanization is going to happen as a result of this brittleness.
Where it can, right? Where it
can. Well, there are even in Antioquia, you're starting to see mechanical harvesting arms and things like that. Like there are new technologies that are coming out, or cherry sorting that's happening in Yunnan with optical sorters. So and again, when you're talking about technology, that immediately goes to a producer of a certain economic status.
Right.
And
the disparity becomes apparent.
Yes, and so, you know, like Jamie is saying, it's just magnifying everything.
Right. And that's those holes that I was talking about that this pandemic is really exposing. So where the vulnerabilities are, they're going to break much more quickly. And where the strengths are, and the people who can tide themselves over with regards to finance and things like that, they'll be fine.
Yeah.
This moment, when we talk about opportunity, this moment is going to birth new opportunity for producers and for what you guys do. What do you guys predict that new opportunity is going to be? We talk about, for example, mechanization. Over the next couple of days, we're going to include that in the discussion as well. There's obviously going to be some opportunities for roasters from a business perspective and from an automation perspective. What do you think those opportunities are going to be for what you guys do? Not you specifically, but in general.
You know, on a personal level, I'm excited to be held to a higher standard. Obviously, like I have my own criterion for what I think different people that I work with need to be doing. But I really I welcome people holding me to a higher standard, and I welcome the fact that because the people who I'm going to be working with and the people who I'm going to be, I wouldn't really say competing against, but just the market landscape is going to be one of skill. I hope that doesn't sound super insensitive, but depending on how political you want to get, all of these problems have always been there. The fact that coffee prices have existed where they are, the fact that banks, make the most money off of financing and have the best ability to predict market shifts, those are conditions that always exist. I like to think about it too as I really try to think about how we at Merit can add value with the things that we can control in our customer experience and in other ways too. Even just something as simple as marketing, those are things that actually put no extra burden on the supply chain and that, are completely within our control and allow us to, or even just like minimizing our waste or cutting our costs. Like, that stuff you should be doing all of the time. And yes, like this is a scary environment to be thinking about that stuff in, but like, I'm like, these are the kinds of experiences that, make you feel strong and stable in times when there's not a crisis. Like, I'm happy to, have people be asking more of me so that I can get better, because sometimes I don't feel like that's the case.
You'd think you were an actual professional or something, Jamie.
So, little by little.
It's tough. How about you, Christopher? What do you think are the innovations and the adaptations that are going to come from this difficult time?
One thing, well, I've been so focused on shelf life study, and like that's my personal obsession.
Can I stop you there? Anyone who hasn't checked out Christopher's blog, christopherferan.com, there's some really interesting blog articles on there. Go and check it out.
Yeah, just because that's one thing that I think about. Like if there are disruptions in the supply chain in the future, we think of coffee as this inert thing, but green buyers know that there is a shelf life to it, and the quality does fade over time. And if we can maximize the shelf life, then hopefully we can regulate the supply so that if there are interruptions, we can still continue to enjoy this agricultural product for decades to come. So that's one area just in terms of green buying. I think people are going to become a lot more sophisticated in evaluating the shelf life of coffee. On the other side of things that I'm seeing that's really interesting is that I think we've done a pretty bad job as an industry reaching new consumers. We looked at the 20-30% year-over-year growth that existed for 8 or 9 years, and then it plummeted in 2016 and has pretty much plateaued since then. And specialty is still kind of a niche market. Like, it's established, it's mainstream, but it's fairly niche. But now, as a result of this crisis, I'm finding more people are brewing coffee at home. They have an interest in brewing coffee at home. It's becoming ritualized in a different way than it was before. And I'm hoping that some of that stays on, because I think that's pretty neat. It gives us an opportunity to reach consumers in a different way, in a different level than we have before.
Yes, I love how this is really forcing all of us to strengthen our e-commerce presence and really think about how, we interact with people in that way. For sure.
Yeah, nice. Arianna, what do you see any innovations and adaptations that are going to come out of this situation or are necessitated out of this situation?
Well, I think it's just accelerated things that were already in the works in many cases. As far as distribution, we've had some conversations, about just how can we get creative, maybe breaking down full bags, doing more of that for smaller roasters that may not be able to commit to a full bag's worth of green coffee, and also kind of meet the shipping minimums so that we can, just create a very efficient distribution for them. So I just welcome, whether you're an importer or a small roaster or looking to get into the industry, reach out and let's have the conversation, because there's a lot of creativity to be had. And I think, just knowing that there is someone willing to have that conversation with you on the other end of the line that, can shed some light on sort of how things have worked in the past, and then what sort of challenges that individual business is facing that can be overcome. We're willing to do that. And I think in most cases, most green coffee warehouses would love to have that conversation so that we can really learn, again, we don't always have the direct relationship with a roaster to know what your needs are. So that's where we're trying to bridge that gap so we can really understand what you're going through, and then, work to be a strong partner with you.
Love that. We have 6 minutes left, and which has gone very quickly from my perspective. I can't believe it. But in the last 6 minutes, we have hundreds of questions sitting in a spreadsheet that need to be answered, but we're not going to get close to all of the questions that are left. I want to open it up to you guys, are there any things that you wanted people to get out of this that we haven't covered yet? Are there any focuses that you want to make sure that people consider after having seen all of the questions that came through and having given the presentation and having had a chat here, is there anything that you think that we haven't covered that are nuggets of gold that we want to make sure that people really start focusing on?
It's a tough question.
I'd say I've just accept that you're going to make mistakes, you know?
That's a good one.
Like,
I mean, especially in uncertain times, right? The mistakes, this is the time to make them, but just don't make them twice.
Yeah, or make them differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that if your failures can be very informative. Like, we emphasize don't overbuy because we've both done it. Well, I would tell any new buyer, don't buy coffee off an export cupping table. That's another mistake that I did.
That's very good advice.
Yeah, don't do that.
Tell us
Take it
why.
back to your lab, cup it there, because when you are, especially if it's, one of the first times that you visited a new place and you're really excited about the relationship that you're building, if you're, in a country of origin, whether you're with a farmer, with an exporter, and you're cupping all the coffees, first of all, you're only looking at the range that is available there, whether it's within that country or from that exporter or producer. So, for better or worse, cupping is super subjective and really dependent on your environment. So you're going to, your scale is really based around the other cuppings that you've been doing during that time.
Right.
Whereas like when you're at home, you're cupping all of your offerings from many different origins and you can understand how they fit against each other. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the physical considerations like you're using different water. It's been sample roasted by someone else,
at a different altitude.
Exactly. At a different altitude. There's different factors. Like I think Christopher and I both use cuppings at origin as more of sort of like a weeding out or like a general idea to get a small sample set to bring back to our own labs in our home countries. And try them there. And I guess also just a third thing is that, you kind of have a little bit of a glow around everything when you're away from home, and especially if it's a new experience for you, and you're going to really, you'll be affected by the experience emotionally, and it's not a bad thing, but it's important to get the perspective of taking it home, and anybody who you shouldn't experience too much pushback if you ask to do that. Like obviously it's it's less risk for the people at origin if they know you're going to buy it right away off the table. But ultimately, like you want the program to be strong for many years. So like you want to, like if you say like, no, I'm going to take this back, and you get it back and you cup it in a timely manner when you get home and stuff, and you have that communication quickly, then like, yeah, it's so much better.
Oh, that's a green buyer etiquette that I wanna mention. Always give feedback on your cupping to your importer, to your producer, whoever. It's part of the conversation so that you can calibrate against each other and get better at this as time goes on.
Yeah,
there's that whole relationship thing again.
Yeah,
absolutely. And if somebody sends you samples unsolicited and you can't cup them, or it just for whatever reason, like based on the price point or whatever, that it's not really even going to be an option for you, then send them a quick note and just let them know, hey, I'm not going to be able to get to this, or like, thank you for sending this to me, but I'm good right now.
There's those direct conversations that are uncomfortable again. But well, Jamie, the reason I say that is because unless we mention here as a group of people that are respected by people, unless we can outwardly say these are difficult conversations for everybody. They're not just difficult conversations for somebody that experiences anxiety or somebody who's inexperienced or anything like that. They're just generally uncomfortable conversations. And by saying that out loud, that gives people who haven't stepped into the courage of having those conversations, it gives them permission to know that I'm not the only person that thinks it's difficult to have this conversation. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, it's can be pretty difficult, but like, you know,
get better.
when you have also just like when you know what your boundaries are for quality, for price, whatever, then like you can just point to the boundary. You don't have to say like your coffee sucks. That's why I don't want to buy it. You know, I never say that, you know?
Well, let's hope that people aren't talking to people like.
And it's not a personal evaluation of someone. You know, you should always like use a measure of tact. But like, yeah, like if you say yes to everything and you can't set those boundaries, then as a green buyer, especially with a quality focused program, you're going to find yourself with a lot of coffee that you can't do anything with. And you just become your lineup becomes diluted and you can't, you know, people will want to work with you more if you know, are easy to work with, but you have a high standard. I mean, at least I hope so. That's what I tried to do. So maybe nobody wants to work with me because of that.
I think there are a few people that want to work with you. Go ahead, Arianna.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think if you frame it as, you know, really seeking truth and seeking the details just to gain a better understanding, and you know, it really kind of can take away that difficulty and the challenge aspect of it, because that's what we're all here working towards, understanding the truth of what's being presented to us. And so, you know, from our perspective, whether you're entering into a long-term contract or just making a spot buy, ask your importer or supplier is being warehoused, and don't be afraid. And if you don't know the questions to ask, contact us and we'll help you, you know, coach you through that, so that, you know, again, there'll be no surprises along the way, and you'll know that you're also, you know, being matched up with supply chain partner here at least in the Pacific Northwest that you can, you know, work with and depend on, and you know, rely on in any situation.
I guess the important part about what you just said goes to the core of a big reason why I wanted to do this 3-day event, Arianna, is because if we look at something that Christopher said, how brittle the supply chain is, doing what you just suggested only goes to strengthening all of the different stakeholders along the supply chain, right? And that should be the objective of all of us in this. How do we strengthen the quality of the value chain that we're a part of? Because then it has more value, right?
Definitely.
A question just came through on the chat that I want to ask you guys. And this is because this was one of the most asked questions. And Christopher and Jamie, you and I spoke about this when we were kind of throwing around ideas for how we were going to approach today's presentation. So the question is, what would you say is the best way to start a new relationship with a producer for the first time? So before you answer, I would like you to make the distinction in how you would have answered that before versus how you would answer that now in COVID. Which one of you brave souls wants to approach the beginning of the answer to this? Because I know that there are a lot of emotions around this particular thing right now with all of us, because we've been trying to get people to do this for a very, very long time.
Not really. You should approach this stuff with a caution and a strong investment mindset anyway. Like, sorry, go ahead, Christopher.
No, co-signed. Go ahead.
Co-signed. I like that.
Yeah, like, you know, I don't think that how to do it has changed. It's just that, you know, how, you know, willing people are to take a risk is, you know, kind of makes everything go a little bit less smoothly. You know, originally this whole talk was going to be about how to create supply chains and how to create new relationships with producers. And we, you know, pivoted pretty drastically to really like the conversation being, how do you maintain the commitments that you have? How do you build a program where you can do that? So, I mean, if I were to give like a step by step of how to start a relationship with a new producer in any climate, it's just all of these are just going to be like maybe you put a little bit more effort into each step um, in this current climate. So yeah, first of all, like you find a producer that you want to buy from. You want to know as much as you can about them. Like obviously, you want to be respectful. You don't, there is definitely a power differential because even in this current climate, it's a buyer's market. So be responsible. But yeah, it's just like how much coffee do you produce? Basic questions like what types of varieties are you working with? What does your processing look like? Like how far along the processing chain can you get the coffee? Like, are you drying it yourself? And then you want to find out who their partners have been. Like, have they ever exported coffee before? Have they ever dry milled coffee before? Because then you're kind of like getting the landscape of which pieces you're going to have to put together. And like we've worked with people who are all the way down to the point where like they're just selling cherry and we have to put together every piece of the supply chain between them. And that really requires kind of more of a network. So like really to distill it, I guess, know the producer as much as you can, like decide how much risk you are personally willing to take with them. So maybe if you have some doubts, or even if it's just the first year, you just want to commit to a smaller volume, and then understand what pieces of the supply chain you're going to have to put together to get from that producer to you, and start slow.
What's the viability of that being something that eventuates into coffee ending up in your roastery right now?
I would just like to say that it'd be great to start with to find out if they have any stocks currently in the U.S. because it's very
that's where I was going.
Already working with an importer and have product available. So if you kind of go the back way, and then you could be pleasantly surprised. So ask that up front.
Well, yeah, that would be like best case scenario. Like they an established supply chain that they like working with. I'm talking about
yes.
Most people who ask us this question are like, I found somebody who grows great coffee in Kenya and I want to get it to my warehouse. But no, if obviously, like if you find out where your partner is at in terms of, supply chains that they've already used and trusted. Because if they have a sample of landed coffee, whether you want to buy it right now or not, you can taste what they have available right now, like get a type sample and kind of get a bit of a pulse on what kind of coffee you might be working with.
And if that supply chain's already established, like, they're already working with an importer to get the coffee here, chances are, even if you want something differentiated, you want some day lot or you want some separation, you can consolidate on the container that is already moving to the US next time or something. It's but I get contacted a lot on Instagram or WhatsApp from producers who don't want to work with the association anymore, want to work more directly, and they ask if I will buy their coffee. And it's maybe one time I've ever gotten it done in a single year. It's a very long process.
Right. And in this current climate, that's likely to be extended given a lot of the logistical challenges that are happening.
I'm much more likely to introduce them to a responsible export partner or import partner who might be willing to take them on.
Definitely. Like I could say, of all the times that I've had coffee farmers contact me directly, only one of them has materialized into a, year-on-year working relationship. Most of the time I'm my first point of contact is somewhere else in the supply chain, and then we build out from there. Or like I start with the producer and introduce them to, people who are going to be able to more immediately support them so that they can strengthen their relationship there a little bit. And also, like if someone already has a strong supply chain that they're working with, the last thing I'm going to do, especially if it's our first time working together, is say, no, like you have to use all of the parties that I choose. And so like yeah, most of the time, if somebody has something that's kind of been working for them, then, we're just going to go with that the first time. And unless there's issues, probably not rock the boat.
Okay. So for everyone that's tuning in, of the hundreds of tickets that were purchased for this event, on behalf of all of you, I'm going to thank Arianna, because Arianna paid for all of your tickets to this event. And it is because of the relationships that we've all built with each other that this could happen. And Arianna, from the first time that I met you, it has just been a joy to be your friend and to be a colleague. And I'm super grateful of what you do for the industry and to the intention that you bring with what you're doing. So thank you for being the reason that we could all attend for free. And it's really important for us to have people like you in this industry at this time, that even when your business is experiencing the same kind of change and disruption as everybody else, when I gave you a call and said, hey, listen, we're going to think of taking this online. Do you still want to support the event? The response was absolutely. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, we so appreciate everything that you're doing to engage our coffee community. This is so important. We all need this nourishment and interaction, and it's wonderful to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jamie and Christopher, I know that I've sung your praises already, but having now gone through this workshop and listened to what you were talking about, and for anyone who was watching that wasn't aware of how badass the two of these people are, that's the only word I say in American. That and a word that I won't even say on here. But I know that's hilarious, isn't it? But when I say it, it sounds like I'm from the South, so I don't want to embarrass myself. But I'm a proud friend of the both of you, of all three of you, but having seen the content that you delivered today, it just makes me that much more proud to put you in front of our audience and say, you need to listen to these people. You need to take their guidance. I'm going to be driving over the next 10 years, driving really hard that people need to get mentors, either mentors they engage deliberately or mentors that they have from afar. The three of you are people who I am honored to say are mentors to the Map It Forward audience. And so thank you for what you do for the industry. It means the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lee.
It's a pleasure. And so for everyone that's watching, if you haven't registered for tomorrow's workshop or on the day after that, so tomorrow is roasting, the day after that is on leadership, these 3 days are a real package of the new coffee industry as it's been affected by COVID-19. And when I say as it's been affected by COVID-19, what I mean by that is this has provided us with the opportunity to fix a lot of the broken shit that is in our industry. And we got to take it. And I'm not going to let the opportunity pass without us pointing out exactly where the gaps are and the holes are. And we're going to have some really difficult conversations over the next few days. But they're going to be fantastic. So I invite you, if you haven't registered, to go and register for the other 2 workshops. Thank you again to the 3 of you. It's an honor to know you. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everyone. Have an amazing rest of your day. See you tomorrow.